Okay, I'm going to touch somewhat briefly on this next analysis technique. This one is quantitative, so very different. And I want to offer, because this is going to be quick, I just want to say Stephen and I both want to make ourselves available if anyone is trying to workshop a spreadsheet of data and wants some help learning some tips and tricks in Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, or any other format you are using. So I want to offer that because I know what I'm about to do is not going to do it justice. So put simply, when you hear the word frequency or frequency analysis, we're talking about counting something. It's perhaps level one when it comes to quantitative analysis. And so if I can get my slide to go to the next, just wanted to offer two quick examples of graphs that resulted from frequency analyses. So this is a graph of the number of students participating in outdoor school statewide over time. This data came from a big spreadsheet, and it involved looking across years at the count of students. You can, of course, see the significant dip because of the pandemic. The next graph is from the same data set, but a different frequency analysis. In this graph, I took the students from the 2022-23 school year and divided them into categories based on their grade. So in this analysis, I'm counting fifth graders, I'm counting sixth graders, I'm counting seventh graders. So just two examples of what that looks like. So we wanted to give you a concrete example. This is a excerpt from a larger project that Christy and a graduate student named Mariah are working on to really understand the topics that outdoor school programs are covering each year. To develop this data set, we identified topics covered based on program summary documents that are submitted to OSU each year. And it resulted in a spreadsheet that looks like this. So I'm going to familiarize you with the spreadsheet, and then we're going to do a few simple, I shouldn't say simple, but a few techniques that should be accessible to you in a spreadsheet. So in this spreadsheet that I'm about to switch over to, we have provider names down the left-hand side, de-identified. And so each row is an outdoor school provider in the state of Oregon. And across the top, you see column headers, and they are each representative of a topic that is covered or not covered in the program summary that we have as our artifact. And so equity inclusion is a topic that we saw in some program summaries: soil, water, plants, and then you can see I created a break in the graph in the spreadsheet, but there are several other categories. Climate, weather is another one. And so those are the headers across the top. In the cells beneath the headers, you see zeros and ones. In our data set, a zero means this topic was not covered in the program summary we have on hand, and a one means it was there. So a simplifying of what is often a more complicated curriculum, but just a 0, 1, did it include these topics? On the right-hand side, I do want to point out two additional columns we added to the spreadsheet. The one is a provider size column to indicate whether the provider was small, medium, or large, based on the number of students served in a year, and the region of the state where the outdoor school program took place. So northern, southern, eastern, western. And those columns are all the way on the right. They're of a different nature. So I am going to switch now to a different screen so I can show you these three techniques: conditional formatting, sum, and divide to create a percentage. All right, so we are in Microsoft Excel. Similar functions exist in Google Sheets. I'm not as familiar with numbers, but I believe similar functions exist in numbers. They just might look a little bit different. And so here you see the data again, down the left-hand side, providers, one provider per row, topics across the top, and then ones and zeros to indicate whether a topic was present in the program. The first trick I'm going to share is to use the conditional formatting function in Microsoft Excel. The idea here is not so much to get an exact count, but to get a sense with a quick look at the data, what are some patterns you might see. To do this, I am going to tell Excel to highlight the cells that have a 1 in them and to keep the other ones blank. I have selected this top left cell of data. I'm going down to the bottom right cell of the 0, 1 data, and I'm going to hit Shift on my keyboard and click with my mouse. So I now have selected my ones and zeros. And then there is a function here at the top that says conditional formatting. When I click on that, I have a bunch of options. In this case, I want it to highlight a cell, and I'm going to tell Excel that I want it to highlight a cell if it is equal to 1. So I'm choosing this option. You can see that there's a lot of flexibility here depending what your data set looks like. Opens a window. You all can see the window, correct? Okay, great. And Excel has filled this in based on the selections I made. So it's going to format only cells that contain a cell value equal to, I'm going to type in 1. And red is kind of a scary color, so I'm going to change it to green, personal preference, and hit OK. And when I hit OK, you will see how the data takes gives it a visual appearance that's suddenly easier to interpret without even having to count. And so I'm just going to observe right off the bat that these 4 columns, soil, water, plants, and animals, have more green than the other columns. You may, with a closer look, make some other observations, but this turns the numbers into color in a way that can perhaps save you some additional analysis if all you need is a quick read on what your data looks like. The second trick I'm going to show you is how you can then add using a simple formula in Excel to get your totals. So I do want to know how many total providers in this data set have a 1 in the equity inclusion column. I'm going to come down to the very bottom, just going to label my row so I can keep track of what I'm doing. And this row these are my totals. So I'm going to say equals sum, S-U-M, parentheses. And then here I can highlight all of the cells that I want Excel to add together. So I'm again selecting, I have the bottom one selected. I'm going to press Shift, click on the top one. Oops, that obviously did not work. Let me try that again. So I have the top one selected. I'm coming down to the bottom. I'm going to click Shift. You can see cells B2 through B40 are now highlighted. And I'll close that parentheses and hit Enter. And I see there were 3, which you could have perhaps counted because there were just 3. So you can check that the formula is working correctly. But then the trick here is to copy this formula across all of the columns that you need added. You can do that in several ways. The one that I find easiest is I grab the bottom right corner and just drag it across. And all of a sudden I have my totals here at the bottom. I can see 32 is the highest, which I'm sorry, 36 is the highest, which is the animals category, and then water, plants, and soil. One other quick trick is to freeze your top row. So that's under view and freeze top row. And that, if I did it correctly, that should allow me to scroll and still see my headers. Super helpful when you have a large data set. Final trick is sometimes it's hard to interpret numbers without a sense of how much is 29? Is that a lot? Is that a little? I do find a lot of times analyses make more sense when I change the numbers into percentages. To do that, I'm going to want to divide this 3 by the total number of providers in this data set, which I can see is 39 because I was counting them. Like numbers on the side, but my row 1 is a header row. So I have 39 rows of data once I remove the header row. Percentage is going to be equals 3, select my cell, divided by 39. And I'm going to hit enter. It's going to show you a long decimal, which we will resolve in a second. To turn this into a percentage, I went back to home, and there's a section here where you get to tell it what type of data you want to see. And I'm going to hit percent, and it's going to change my decimal into a percent. And again, I'm like, oh, I like that. 8% makes sense to me. I'm going to drag across. And now we have a set of percentages. These could then be turned into a graph. But it is helping us already get a sense of the answer to our question, which is what are the topics most frequently covered in outdoor school programs? With some additional tricks, we could disaggregate by provider size to see if there's a difference between what large providers are covering and what small providers are covering, or maybe it depends on the region of the state. So there are then additional steps we could take, but those will we will save for another time or for when you reach out to me or Stephen for some additional help. Okay, again, I'm going to pause. Questions, comments, other pieces from my team or from anyone in the room?
Well, I was going to say, so how we approached this, the phase of this is like a bigger project that we're starting, is we're in the phase of like, with the data that we already have, what do we know at like a very basic level about what might be happening in outdoor school programs? And part of the motivation for this was looking at the legislation that's related to the funding for outdoor school, which lists out a bunch of specific topics, soil, water, plants, and animals being like the ones that people most commonly know of and can roll off, but also things like interconnections between urban and rural areas, like things about Oregon's economy or natural resources. There's all of these topics that are listed in the program summaries. And so we actually took those topics from the legislation text and used those as most of the categories. So most of them were predetermined because in this phase, we're just trying to get a picture of what's happening compared to what it says in the legislation. But then Mariah, who's the grad student who's working on this project, also we talked about like, if she notices other things that are coming up that are interesting, like, oh, I noticed that like several people are doing archery or whatever, just as an example, like she might then be like, maybe we should add a theme for archery to try to understand how widespread that particular activity is throughout the state. So it started off as predetermined, but there were like a few emergent elements to it, if that makes sense.
I would actually say that is what we've hoped to do with this project with Mariah, in that we did provide Mariah this list to help her get started with like what she's looking for. But the emerging other topics emerged that we didn't think to include on the list. And so we were like, oh, outdoor schools in some places are doing this. So in that way, we did combine both. We have some emergent themes. I do want to clarify the spreadsheet that I shared with you is a small piece of a much longer, wider spreadsheet with many more columns. So I don't know if that helps, but just so you know, the handful that are here are pretty limited, and we have actually a much longer spreadsheet, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I made it much shorter. And then the other thing I want to offer, I don't know that this was in your question, but I think it's an important kind of nuance to offer, that in this project and in many research and evaluation projects, the goal is not to make a judgment about individual providers, right? It's not to say, I'm going to look at one row here and understand how this one row is performing. In many research and evaluation projects, you're looking down across the many rows, if you know what I'm saying. So our goal at the end of the day is not to say, this provider looks to be doing this and this provider looks to be doing this, but rather to look for patterns across all of the state to help us as a statewide backbone make decisions about where additional support is needed, where there might be opportunities for sharing across the network. And yes, so wanted to make that point about patterns across the system rather than somehow evaluating individual providers with this analysis.
This is a great example of like the data that you have put limitations on your analysis. Like the data that we have in this case are the program summaries, which we know are not a one-to-one match with what's actually happening on the ground in the programs. And so our analysis is limited by the fact that this is the data set that we're using for this particular project. So yeah, it's a nuanced, just lots of questions and choices pop up throughout the process for sure.
Stephen.
Yeah, I'm just going to name it. There's bias in the instrument, right? In that it doesn't ask for everything we're then later analyzing. And so I appreciate you naming like that. Actually goes back to data collection, but its implications cut through analysis. And then the other thing that just kind of popped up to me, this isn't a critique of my colleagues, it's just thinking about ongoing journey and how Mariah's, oh, this is emerging, right? And that's one person, right? Like that's not a group of people coming together. And so I was just hearing that, I'm like, and make one more connection. You said time, right? And like how the real amount of time that we can put to something. And so we have to make strategic decisions around how many people come together around analysis, right? And it's like, it could be endless. And so I was just hearing all those things. I was like, wow. So that's all.